acknowledge sensory perception. It's only a means to an end. They don't give their attention really to anything. Trees, the sky, the flowers. A brief look, yes, oh, that's a lovely flower. And then you start continue thinking about your problems. Or you make the flower into a problem. That's a lovely flower. What is it called again? I'm just trying to figure out, is it that? No, it's not quite that. Well, I need to look that up. You can get an app now. You just take a picture of a flower and it tells you what it is. Or then you say, oh, I wonder where I can buy these flowers. I'd love to have them in my living room. Or I'll give them to someone tomorrow. Just where can you buy them? I need to look that up too. Or you're more sophisticated and you say, oh, this reminds me of a painting by so-and-so that I saw. That was a great paint. And then you talk about it because others need to know that you are highly sophisticated. Not long ago I heard a man was looking at the sky, beautiful sky, and he said to his acquaintance or somebody, oh, that's a lovely Turner sky. Turner was a British wonderful landscape and painter of skies and light. But immediately it's associated with the thinking thing. You need to label it, interpret it, compare it, like or dislike it. That is the usual perception. So you're not really fully present with it because you are seeing it through the veil of your mental conditioning. This is the veil of thinking. You might even, emotion might even be part of it. You might look at the flower and say, oh, that's the flower, that's my husband gave me these flowers on our wedding day. And then a little later, it went all wrong. Everything went wrong after that. Oh no! Oh. Now, in order to use sensory perception as a doorway into the state of awareness, it is important to, as much as you can, let go of any interpretation or mental labeling. In other words, you practice looking without naming. It's a powerful spiritual practice that puts you very quickly in touch with your essence identity, because the naming is part of your form identity. It's part of the conditioned mind. How you name things depends on the conditioning of your mind. And even the language that you use to name things is part of the conditioning of your mind. So, a very powerful spiritual practice that can give you a realization, no matter how brief, of your essence identity, which is awareness itself, which is consciousness itself, is the practice of letting go of naming, the compulsion to immediately interpret, name, call it something, have some kind of personal relationship with it, refer it to something else. You drop that, because that is all part of the conditioned entity, the self, as the Buddha called it. That is the form identity. And when you practice looking or listening or touching any sense, you practice letting go of labels. At first it may not be easy because the labels will immediately want to come in, but don't give them any importance, just drop them and bring your attention fully to the sense perception and just look. You can either look at one thing Or you can look at the totality of what surrounds you. Like here it would be this beautiful room or space. And so you look around at various things, and your practice is not naming it. Be so present that the compulsion to name it falls away. And that is a huge shift in consciousness. What exactly is happening? Well, instead of a person perceiving the world, you are now the awareness that's perceiving the world. You're not in that. As you drop the labels, you become aware that in the background of your sense perception, there is not some historical person, there is a silent presence. In the background of your sense perceptions, there's a silent presence. That silent presence is it's alive. You can't really define it in words. You just know there's the presence without which you would not be able to perceive anything. And you know what you're looking at, but you don't know it through words. It's a non-conceptual knowing, a deeper knowing. We humans desperately need to find that deeper dimension of consciousness where they become free of the egoic self. And it starts with a simple thing like perceiving without naming. And you might then discover, if you can sustain it for a few seconds, or perhaps even half a minute or a minute, you may discover when you look at a flower, for example, or the sky, or a tree, natural things are easier to practice with. Later, as you become more present, you can look at anything without needing to name it. Of course, obviously, there's a place for naming. Sometimes you need to name it. We know that. It can be very useful. Otherwise, you cannot communicate with anybody. You say, "Oh, I don't know I don't know." But we do not need to dwell on that because you're all experts in naming, so we don't need to go into that here. You've all been conditioned to name and name and name continuously. So you're good at that already. That's why we don't need to go into that. You can go to universities for that and so on. We're here to explore a deeper dimension of consciousness without which your life cannot be truly fulfilled. And it starts with a simple thing like perceiving without naming. And then, now this is so wonderful, you're perceiving something, you're fully aware of the sense perception, like this room here and now. Do you remember that Jesus said somewhere, you need to become like little children? Unless you become like little children, you cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. What are like little children like? They are not compulsively naming things yet. They want to know, but there comes an age when they say, "What's that? What's that? What's that?" The mind wants to name, that's normal. But before they reach that stage, they're at that stage of just, when you look into the eyes of a 1-year-old baby, and the baby looks back at you, and you feel so good in that moment because you know that the baby is not naming you, it's not interpreting you, it's not calling you anything, it's not comparing you to anybody, and not that is at a stage prior to the arising of thinking. Now, we are not returning to the state that is prior to the arising of thinking. We are here, the spiritual awakening is the ability to rise above thinking. We are not talking about falling below thinking. That is good for the baby, it's wonderful. You can also look into the eyes of a dog or a cat. So you look into the eyes of the dog, and the dog looks back at you, and unless you have a phobia, I suppose dog phobic exists, there are many phobias these days. Unless you have a phobia, many people love dogs. And you look into the eyes of the dog, and for a moment you feel something in you feels good for a few seconds. This is why, if you're a dog owner, you might quite often people will stop you in the street, or if you're sitting somewhere, they'll just start talking. They're looking at your dog, and they're interested in your dog, and they say something, "Oh, what a lovely dog." But then they feel good for a moment. Why do they feel good looking into the eyes of the dog? Because they feel a connectedness with that being. The being that exists prior to thinking is in a state of deeper connectedness with the source of who they are, the beingness, hasn't lost itself yet in the mind, and they know that the dog is not judging them. The dog has no thought about them. Yes, dogs can sense people who have bad intentions and so on. Dogs can sense that. But if you are looking at a dog, usually, let's assume you have no bad intention, you're not a dreadful human being, and the dog runs away from you. You look at the dog, and the dog enjoys that moment too, because most dogs, when you look at them, the tail will already go. And there's a moment of connection. What is it that you love? You love the consciousness of the dog, not really. Yes, the dog might look nice on the outside, might also be nice to touch, but the essence of the dog, you can sense the dog essence. The essence of the dog, like the essence of all life forms, is consciousness in varying vibrational frequencies of manifestation. You don't have the veil of the mind and the personality in a dog. It's a moment you feel liberated from yourself for a few seconds when you connect with a dog, or look into the eyes of the baby. For a moment you feel that. So dogs don't inhabit the same reality as humans. Dogs they don't have the problems, obviously, that humans have, that are created by the egoic human mind. For example, I've never met a dog that has a problem with self-image, or feels unhappy about their body, because there is no self-image. The self-image is the egoic self. Even the fattest dog is happy with. It's an enormous thing to be free of self-image, and that's why the dog is so joyful a lot of the time. Sometimes, as you know, you leave a dog alone at home, and even if you're only away for 10 minutes, you come back, the dog greets you as if you had been away for years. So much joy. So this is prior to the arising of the self that's created by thinking. And all humans are longing to be free of the burden of themselves. The burden of themselves, the Buddha called it the self, that he describes as a delusional state. Humans have a longing, and often they seek that freedom from themselves through ultimately destructive things like toxic drugs and so on. to be free for a moment of the torture, the daily torture of your mind. If you take in certain liquids, alcoholic beverages, they're called, or you smoke a certain substance, you begin to feel suddenly better about yourself and life. Everything suddenly changes and you start laughing, perhaps you laugh. Before you were burdened by your problems. And then you go, oh, nice, very nice. And then you smoke more and you do it every day and you go on and gradually what might have been a nice experience, might have given you a glimpse of being free of yourself for a moment, not having to think about me and my problems, me and my life. My life, what you people call my life, is a narrative in their minds. They think that's my life. It's not your life. It's a narrative in your mind. Your life is here and now. Your sense perceptions and that which underlies your sense perception, which is the unconditioned consciousness or the awareness. You are the consciousness for everything, for the world. That is your life. The rest, the narrative, is not your life. People carry the burden that they describe as my life, and they think about it. I don't know any life that's not problematic in one way or another. And many so-called lives are really unpleasant. Awful things have happened in the past. Either things that I did, things that people did to me, things that I remember and you dwell on and derive my sense of self from. Dreadful prison, but ultimately it's a narrative, and the narrative is often accompanied by corresponding emotions. Me and my life. And maybe it'll get better in the future. I just hope it'll get better. So of course, sometimes it does get better until it gets worse again. And so they want to be free of that. Or you drink. Or there are worse, much worse drugs than the smoking stuff and the drinking stuff. They're very destructive things that you can take, and more people are seeking refuge there. It becomes very self-destructive. What can give you a moment of insight of what life can be like without the burden of your mind. Let's take acid. I don't know if people still take that these days. That you take that and it can remove the sometimes temporarily the self-talk, all that stuff, and you suddenly look at the world as if you had never seen it before, and you go, oh my God, wow, look at that, it's a glass of water. Oh, I can't believe it. It's so amazing. The truth, it is amazing. But you don't need acid to see that it's amazing. But if acid gives you a glimpse of it, you take it once or twice, okay, then it has fulfilled its function. It has given you a glimpse of what is possible. I had to try it once because people kept asking me questions about it. And I could see, of course, people have different experiences, but I could see how it amplifies sense perceptions. Like your sense of smell becomes extremely acute. Oh, you smell all kinds of things that only a dog could smell before. And then you taste, and even the water has a very specific taste that you had to, oh my God, wow. And you look at things, and they are alive. The wall this wall in the room seems to be pulsating with life. It goes, wow. I could see what it does, and now I know why people ask me questions about it. They compare it to the state of presence, and they want to know, is that what it is? Well, not quite. presence is much better. Much better. So I wouldn't take it again because I have no desire to experience that. But my normal state is preferable, infinitely preferable. So sense perceptions as a doorway into presence. Wonderful practice. Remember what I said? There's two of you. Now I use the expression, another way to describe it, your form identity, your essence identity, they go together in the same way that the wave on the surface of the ocean, we could say that's your form identity, is one with the ocean. The ripple or the wave on the surface of the ocean is not separate from the ocean. But let's just use this analogy for a few more seconds and say, let's imagine that the ripple on the surface of the ocean is you. And this ripple that is you does not know that it is one with the ocean. It only knows itself as the ripple. It lives on the surface of the ocean, unaware of the depths of the ocean. And then it has a certain relationship with other ripples around. And usually problematic relationship with other ripples. Because all the ripple knows it's little form. It's little form. And a surface reality becomes very unsatisfying, dissatisfying. And then at some point the ripple begins to awaken to its deeper reality. And the ripple for a moment starts thinking about being a ripple, in fact stops thinking altogether without losing consciousness, rises above thinking, and becomes aware of a depth to its being. When the mind stops, we're done with the analogy of ripple now. When the mind stops, suddenly you become aware of, first of all, it seems to be nothing. You don't know anything anymore. But the mind stops, but you have not fallen below thought. That is not the way to go. Because that's the way return to unconsciousness. We are here, the spiritual awakening is the ability to rise above thought. It doesn't mean that you don't think anymore. It just means that the destructive and compulsive thinking that is totally useless, that begins to fall away. The ability to think constructively actually increases, and most importantly, your identity, your sense of self is no longer derived from the narratives in your mind. That is the awakening. So become aware of a depth to who you are. At first, a sense of emptiness when you're not thinking. For example, now, is it possible at this moment to be here, to take it all in, visually, mostly, I suppose, to take it in and not think about it, nor to think about the dinner you're going to have later or what you have to do tomorrow, but to be so present that there is a gap in the stream of thinking. Maybe even just a few seconds. Something falls away, and what's left is the consciousness that you are. And then there's the sense perception. So there's a twofold awareness now. There's the awareness of the outer world, that you take that in through sense perception, and more importantly, and this may sound a little weird, a little strange, you're also aware at this moment that you are aware. You can sense your own awareness. You can sense it's not yours, we just call it that. You can sense the consciousness that is the essence of who you are. It has no form, it is deep. It connects you with the totality of consciousness. This connects you with the source of all life. It connects you with ultimately God. I don't like to use that word, it's dangerous. You can't talk about God because you immediately reduce that to something that the mind can comprehend. But that's what it is. But we're not trying to comprehend it, so that's okay. So to be aware of yourself as consciousness, for that the mind needs to stop, if only for a few seconds, doesn't matter. Sometimes it happens when you breathe consciously. You're conscious of your breath and your attention moves with the breath in and out. And then you sense a stillness arising. That stillness is awareness. That stillness is consciousness. And there's a depth to it. It is not, we call it stillness. Now, stillness usually would be the absence of noise. Strictly speaking, probably in English, silence is the absence of outer noise, and stillness is the absence of inner noise. And what is inner noise? The noise of thought. Stillness is the absence of inner noise. Oh. And at first it's nothing much, but then you suddenly feel a little bit of peace. And then there's more as it deepens. The realization of stillness deepens. And this is a dimension that the Buddha called Shunyata, which is translated as emptiness, but I don't think that's a good translation. Better translation I'm offering you is spaciousness. I sometimes call it space consciousness as opposed to object consciousness. Space consciousness, object consciousness. Object consciousness, every thought is an object of consciousness. Every sense perception becomes an object in your consciousness. So one object after another, even an emotion, is an object that arises in the space of consciousness. And now most humans are never aware of consciousness. They are only not really aware of the objects that arise in consciousness. They are completely identified with the continuous arising of object consciousness. Continuously identified with one thing after another. Or as Churchill said, one damn thing after another. He was talking about human history, but it can also be referred to the human mind. One damn thing after another, one thought after another, object consciousness. No awareness of the underlying space consciousness. To go back for a second with my analogy of the ocean, complete unawareness, the ripples, complete unawareness of the ocean. Absurd. And now the strange thing is, let's go back to this analogy just for a few more seconds. When the moment that the ripple, or perhaps you're not a ripple, perhaps you're a wave. If you're a VIP, you're a big wave. And then, it doesn't last that long either. So the ripple or the wave suddenly becomes aware of its own depths. That is the awakening, but that's not just the awakening of the ripple, it's the awakening of the ocean through the ripple. That means, of course, your awakening is not a personal event at all. Your awakening is an essential part of the awakening of the totality. We could call it the universe. This dimension is involved in an evolutionary process. The entire, not only planet Earth, but the entire universe is evolving. It is gradually becoming more conscious. It is awakening to itself. And that is the purpose of life, is greater consciousness coming into this dimension. It comes from somewhere else. Consciousness is not at home in this dimension. It just, I'm sorry to use slightly poetic language, but that's all we can do. Consciousness is not at home in this dimension. It shines into, so to speak, it shines into this dimension from a transcendent realm. And what is that? Okay, we're going to a place now that you can't really talk about at all, but I'll go there anyway. The consciousness that you are obviously is totally invisible. You cannot find it with the most powerful microscope. And even the things that are in your thinking consciousness are invisible too. No surgeon would ever find your memories. The countless memories that in your mind, they do not have a physical reality. There's a correlation, of course, in the physical realm with what happens in your mind, but the content of your mind itself already is invisible to the senses. No surgeon would be able to find, let's assume that your grandmother or your grandfather are no longer around, but your memory is still there of your grandmother or your grandfather. No surgeon could ever find your grandmother by cutting open your brain. Where's the grandmother? She's very strong memory there, but you can't find, because your grandmother is invisible. It's all totally invisible. It's not even part of this dimension. And you are essentially invisible. There's only the physical body here, but even the thoughts that you have, yes, they manifest in the physical realm. To some extent, they affect the physical realm, but in themselves, they are not part of the visible dimension at all, let alone the deeper consciousness that you are is not part of this dimension, but consciousness shines into this dimension. It is that which underlies the manifestation of form in this universe. In other words, it is a vast intelligence that operates below the level of manifestation, but is the organizing principle behind all the manifestations of life, all the life forms. There is an intelligence that is operating, which is the organizing principle behind this unbelievable complexity and multiplicity of phenomenal life forms. On this planet alone are just incredible complexity and depth and beauty and intelligence, but even your physical body, the intelligence that continuously operates, organizing, coordinating countless bodily functions so that the molecules are held together by this vast intelligence that pervades your inner body but is totally invisible. And with vast intelligence, when this ray of of consciousness withdraws at some point, immediately the molecules and atoms of your body disperse, and the body dissolves. It's gone. But the intelligence itself originates from a place that is beyond time. So the timeless is the essence of who you are. And consciousness, the greatest mystery in the universe is consciousness, obviously. Yes, there are the two other mysteries are the microcosm, the molecular, atomic, and subatomic realm. There's incredible mysteries there. It becomes incomprehensible if you go deep enough there, where by the way you realize that physical matter doesn't actually exist. It's not physical matter at all. It just seems to be physical. It's not physical. There's no solidity there whatsoever. It's all great mystery, which we haven't understood hardly anything of. But then there is the mystery of the macrocosm, the mystery of outer space. When I was 11 and 12, I remember I was very interested in this mystery. I was talking to my dad. I was trying to imagine, does the universe has an end or does it go on forever? It's impossible to imagine. I tried very hard. But if it goes on forever, how is that possible? It goes on and on and on. But if it has an end, what's beyond the end? The boundary of the universe. It's totally impossible to understand. Yes, these are great mysteries, but a more fundamental mystery is consciousness, that the universe is conscious. That is so amazing. And science does not know what consciousness is. Many scientists don't even want to talk about it. And when they do talk about it, it's pretty incomprehensible because they don't know what they're talking about. Yeah. The reason is you cannot analyze or understand consciousness because that which you use to analyze and understand consciousness is consciousness. It's like you have a torch, the light of a torch, and you're using the light to looking for the torch. Where is it? So again, God also, we imagine God as if God were an object in consciousness. An object, as if we could say that God is somewhere in space and time. Traditionally, that's what people thought. That usually they pointed upward, that God is up there. Of course, even up and down is an illusion. There is no up. When you leave the earth, there's no up and down anymore. And so, what is God? That's a very deep question. What do we mean by that? And is God consciousness? Well, we have to be careful when we go there. The analogy that works best, I feel, is to look at the sun. The sun, the life giver for us here. Without the sun, there would be no physical life here, The sun makes physical life forms possible, and the sun continuously shines. It emanates what we call light, and light brings life. It's the sun. Obviously, we know it has a lifespan, but for all practical purposes, we could say the sun is almost eternal compared to our lifespan. So it continuously emanates this vast power that we perceive as light, the life-giving power. And in this analogy, there is in the transcendent realm, there is a source that we cannot understand, we cannot name, there's nothing really we can say about it, as this source emanates consciousness into this dimension in the same way that the sun emanates light. In fact, consciousness and light are often compared. So it shines into this dimension, and gradually in this dimension there is an evolution of life. But that which gives life, the underlying vast intelligence that is consciousness, that itself emanates and is continuously connected to a transcendent dimension. So God is the unnameable source of all. But that source lives in every being, in every human being. And when you know yourself as consciousness, then you know yourself as not, I wouldn't say God, that's perhaps a bit too much. I am God. There have been mystics in Christianity and Islam and others who have said that, some Sufis in Islam, and it wasn't a good idea to say that. People, usually they got killed for it. It is not quite right. In the same way that a ray of sunlight wouldn't say, I am the sun, because there's a vast difference between the ray of sunlight and the sun, my God. And God, yeah. But the consciousness that you are is an emanation from that transcendent dimension, from God. So I would describe that as the light of God in you is consciousness. Consciousness is the light, not God, but the light of God. But ultimately, the light of the sun and the sun are one. They are connected, they are one. So what in mystical Christianity and many other religions, that what is described as God realization, the possibility of God realization. Buddhism doesn't talk about God at all. It doesn't mean they don't believe it. Well, Buddhism doesn't want to make God into a concept. The Buddha very cleverly avoided talking about God. The story goes, when often he was asked, does God exist? And in the scriptures it says, the Buddha kept noble silence. Does God exist? That's the answer. Some people got it, many didn't. So the danger is the moment you talk about it, it becomes a concept, it becomes reduced to a concept. And so that is what happened traditionally in religions. And every religion developed a branch that kept the actual experience of that reality alive. In Christianity it was the great Christian mystics, and in Islam it was the Sufis, and then in Buddhism there was Buddhism had already become very much identified with belief over many centuries, had become identified with rigid practices and beliefs. And then there came renewal movements, as often happens in Zen suddenly arose. Zen started in China and then moved to Japan. And then is an attempt to let go of all concepts, to do away with concepts. And enter directly the reality of, as they call it, no mind, in a very, sometimes in a very yang way, in almost an aggressive way, but for some people it works, for others it doesn't. I don't know to what extent Zen is still truly alive as a tradition now, but the great teachers were wonderful. And Zen talks about no mind. And it asks nonsensical questions. If you have had any contact with Zen, it poses certain riddles that you cannot answer, the koans, certain riddles. What, why? What is the purpose? The purpose of the riddle is to make you stop thinking. And what is the sound of one hand clapping? It can drive you insane if you start thinking about it. And the master demands an answer. Tell me now, what's the sound of one hand clapping? Many Zen masters looked very fierce. You can see the old paintings. They want to get you to that. It's a yang. Some people respond to this yang approach to awakening. Some Zen masters would hit you with a stick when you fall asleep during meditation. And you have to say, thank you, master, thank you. So it's an attempt to enter the state of ultimately thoughtless awareness. So that's the awakened state, thoughtless awareness. And another thing Zen does is did very unpleasant practices, like in many schools of Zen. If you have to go to a monastery, you sit facing a wall, and then they open the windows in the middle of winter, and you sit there and have to meditate for several hours facing the wall. You become very unhappy. And then, if it works for you, at some point, there comes a complete surrender. All the unhappiness is recognized as a mental emotional reaction, and you come to a place of complete acceptance of the present moment. No matter what form it takes, no matter what form your experience of the present moment takes, you are no longer opposing the form that your experience of this moment takes. And that is a doorway into the awakened state. It doesn't mean you cannot change things, but at this moment, it is as it is. At this moment, this is what is. Can you accept whatever you're experiencing at this moment? Accept means not resisted internally. Not resisted internally. That was quite a transformation. And some people arrived at it through very unpleasant life situations. I've had accounts of people in prison, including I've had letters from people in prison, and some have actually written books about it. I've met some personally who, in the most dreadful conditions, experienced awakening. They became so unhappy and miserable that it all suddenly dissolved in them. The entire very unhappy self could not stand its own unhappiness anymore and self-destructed, so to speak. It dissolved. And there was just this moment, just that. And they became free. The ego dissolved. They became free. They realized, even if they didn't have the words for it, they realized their own essence as consciousness. They probably wouldn't have been able to say that, but that's what it was. And so liberation is possible in very difficult surroundings and very difficult circumstances. In fact, this shift in consciousness is more likely to happen when things go wrong in your life than when things go right in your life. In other words, your comfort zone, it's not likely that your spiritual awakening will happen in your comfort zone while you're in the comfort zone. Oh, it's fine. Oh, it's all fine. It's good. Yeah. I'm so happy. Everything is good. And then something happens and you're taken out of your comfort zone completely. And then there comes the possibility of a shift in consciousness. And so that ultimately is the purpose of suffering. Because suffering has a purpose. Human suffering is part of the necessary, unavoidable evolution of human consciousness. The suffering that comes when challenges arise. And you suffering in one form or another. Then that, for many humans, the possibility arises of awakening as suffering arises. Often it doesn't happen, but potentially that's the moment of awakening, where awakening becomes more possible than it was before. Unhappiness. So suffering is, in evolutionary terms, suffering is necessary until it becomes unnecessary. That's why the Buddha described his own teaching in these words: I teach suffering and the end of suffering. I teach suffering, which means I show you how suffering arises, and I show you how to transcend suffering. Or, perhaps more accurately interpreted, he said, I show you how suffering arises, and by seeing how suffering arises, how you make yourself suffer, by seeing that, you begin to transcend it. Wow. So suffering then becomes something that the great awakener. And so, if this happens in your life, become aware of it directly as suffering, instead of mentally perpetuating the suffering self by dwelling on negative narratives. Instead of that, bring an acceptance to the suffering on whatever level it happens. But that means this does not happen until you let go of the narratives that perpetuate it. So the awareness is necessary. You need the awareness in the background. Then suffering itself becomes a doorway. Suffering itself becomes a doorway. And then that's the end of suffering. It's all contained in the archetypal image of Jesus on the cross, the ultimate image of suffering. And the cross is not only a torture instrument that gives you suffering, it's also a symbol of transcendence of suffering, a symbol for the divine. So you have the death and resurrection contained in this archetypal image that people sometimes can understand that intuitively, because they may not have been capable of understanding it conceptually. I kind of explain it conceptually. But there have been people throughout Christianity in the past, I don't know how many, who looked at this picture, which seemingly is nonsensical at first when you arrive. If you're an alien from another planet and you arrive here and you see Jesus are praying to a God on a cross, they say, what is this? And some people, I have a great distaste for it, to say, this is so terrible. But you don't need to be a Christian to understand the deeper meaning of that. The deeper meaning shows this twofold nature of the cross. it's the agent of suffering, but it's also the door to transcendence, the cross as the symbol of the divine. That's an amazing teaching in there. And some people throughout Christianity have been able to, even often very simple people, not usually the people who are the head of the churches or even the priests, but sometimes very simple people, they looked at Jesus' suffering and they say, my suffering is Jesus' suffering. I partake in the suffering of Jesus. And this has taken them to a place of complete acceptance of what is, and thereby transcendence. But that's just the essence of all this is beyond any particular religion, obviously, but the religions all point to it, but the essence is quite deeply hidden. So before we finish, just to summarize it all, remember that you are a human being. That means the human is you as the person, you as somebody with a personal history and a life situation and a body that for a while lives on this planet, never for very long. You live, so you are human, but you are also a being. The being is the transcendent dimension of who you are. And it's not enough to be human. You need to be a human being in order to have a fulfilled life, in order to fulfill the purpose of why you are here. The transition from being merely a human to being a human being, so you embody also the dimension of being, and then you bring the being and the human together. That is the dance, the mastery of this earthly life, and your task is to bring the being into the human together, and then the being begins to shine through the human more and more. Your personality lessens, and something else shines through. The lampshade, which before was very dense, hardly let any light through, the lampshade, which is you, becomes more and more transparent to the light that is inside the lamp. Sort another analogy. So that is your purpose here, is to gradually diminish as a person, but allow the person to be that which transmits the light of consciousness into this world. And that is your task. And then this manifests in many, many ways. The way in which you relate to other human beings is you're no longer meeting just another human, you're meeting another human being. So you can sense the being beyond the human in the other also. It's a very important thing, because when just two humans meet, you have a lot of conflict. But when two human beings meet, you can allow the differences of the human level. They are there, but there is something that transcends that, and that brings in a goodwill towards other humans. It brings in loving kindness, to use a Buddhist term, metta, loving kindness, agape, an emanation of benevolence, which is a Latin term, translated goodwill, benevolence. Goodwill flows out to you because you recognize your being in the other being. Your being is one. The being is one. The sense of absolute separation goes away. And on a human level, you're separate, but more fundamentally, you are one with the other. And that recognition is, and now I finish this talk with the one word I haven't used yet, the recognition of the other as essentially yourself is love. Thank you.